Well, it was more for the...
I'm thinking about putting my coat back on, and I haven't even. It's chilly.
Yeah, I brought a sweater.
Okay.
knows how to get your legs.
It was meant for hushing.
I can't keep track. Must be March.
The Ides of March, E2 Regis.
15th of something, right?
Oh, yep. And the
Well,
Virginia
thank
flag,
you all for
sacred
not being
terrain.
frightened of the snow. But,
Randolph, if you want to communicate, I suggest you face the audience. But Martha asked me to say.
thank you.
Martha asked me.
I just made the point that I'm pleased to see as many of you as are here. I thought I might be speaking to Rick and the camera tonight.
Oh, yeah.
All right, very good. I also must, I won't say apologize because it was the right decision, but let's say announce that I'm not going to be able to do two seats tonight because I got so interested in not only the history but the implications of the history of our first, what I had planned to be our first saint, but will be our only saint tonight. And also thought it necessary to give a little bit of background about a number of things as we go. Yeah. Are we ready?
Yep, we're on.
This evening's subject is a woman, Hildegard of Bingen, who was born around 1098 in what is now Germany, but it wasn't Germany then. It was what was known as the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire, some wit described as neither holy nor Roman nor yet an empire, was basically a collection of a number of small states. And some were large, but there were many rather small ones. And they were, at its greatest extent, it covered Germany up to Prussia. It covered about a third, maybe, of France, stretching all the way down to Savoy, that's right on the Mediterranean, and a great deal of Italy. So it was big. And it lasted a long time. It lasted until 1806. So that's serious. But it really was not an empire as we usually understand it. It was, as I say, a collection of many small states, a few large states, some of which were semi-independent, each of which had its own set of laws and so forth, but all owing allegiance to an emperor. Now, this was not an emperor in the sense that we normally think of. These emperors were elected. They were elected for life. Don't believe it was one man, one vote. It wasn't. The number of electors varied throughout the years, but at this time it was, I believe, 7, 3 of whom were archbishops. And this was not a hereditary position to be an elector. It was in a sense a hereditary position. It went with the title, certain titles. So if you were the Duke of Saxony, you were also the Elector of Saxony. Now, this sounds totally unworkable, the idea of all these tiny little states. But it's sort of like that old thing, I don't think it's true, but a lot of people believe it, that it can be proven aerodynamically that bumblebees cannot fly. But they don't know that, so they go ahead and do it anyhow. This sounds like it wouldn't work, but it did up until 1806. So that's the world, the political world that Hildegard was born into. It was not as some of the saints lived through that we see previously spoken of. It was not a world at constant war. Yeah, there was violence. I mean, it was a rough time. But generally speaking, within the Holy Roman Empire, there was a high degree of civic order, a high degree of peace, and consequently a high degree of prosperity. So not a bad time. That's the world into which Hildegard was born. Now, before I talk about her, I want to tell you, we have good sources for her life. That tends to happen if you get really famous in your own lifetime. The most important one probably is known unoriginally enough as the life of St. Hildegard. But it was written rather oddly. It was begun by a monk, one Godfrey, while Hildegard was still alive. But he died. So one of her secretaries, a French monk named Guibert, took it up. And he was to continue the work. He was charged with it. That was his duty. But he got called back to his home monastery in France. And so the project was finally finished by a monk named Theodoric of Externach, who was from what is now Luxembourg, which is part of the Holy Roman Empire. That's one source. There are other lives, but they aren't up to this standard, because these men, the first two, actually knew Hildegard, and so it's based in part on her recollections. Over 400 of her letters survive. It's one of the largest collections of letters from the Middle Ages. And these are important because they were written, some of them to people who are otherwise not known, but many of them to popes, emperors, kings, Eleanor of Aquitaine, all sorts of really significant people. And they deal with a wide variety of issues. Also, in her three major prose works, which I'll discuss later, there are a number of autobiographical reminiscences. And then there's one other book, The Life of Lady Jutta, I'll talk about her in a bit, which also provides some context in it. And then there's documentation, which was put together for her after her death to begin the canonization process. So what was her background? What was she like? Her parents were lower German nobility. The German nobility was very much stratified. And her father was a Margaret, which is sort of right under a duke, really. And he was a soldier and a landowner under the Count of Spanheim. So the family was lower nobility, but they were notably wealthy. They were very well off. She was a weak and sickly child, and consequently, for the first years of her life at home, she received very little education. She was only 8 years old when she was given as an oblate to the Benedictine double monastery at Isenberg, or Isenbodenberg. Both terms are used. Remember, oblates were children who were given to the monastery with the expectation that they would serve there, that they would be educated there, and most of them would become monks or nuns. So she was given an oblate. Sometimes people think that this oblate thing was, let's get rid of this extra child, and that's the way to keep the nunneries and monasteries going and so forth. And they'll basically be servants. But that was not the case. The oblates, if they took orders, were just like any other monk or nun, with the exception of significant realization of social classes. So this was a Benedictine double monastery. That is, there was a male monastery and there was a female nun. It was a particular type of foundation at that point. It later changed into a more conventional monastery, but it was known as a Frauenklause. It was a sort of female hermitage. That means that the sisters lived separately in small cottages, sometimes two to a cottage, but more often just one. But they worshiped together. So that's where she would be based for the rest of her life. At the age of 15, she made her life profession. In order to become a monk or a nun, you go through a period known as the novitiate. The new people, it can be translated as, which is a period of discernment as to whether or not you want to spend the rest of your life there. When you say, yes, I am definitely going to take these orders, then you become a full member of the monastery or nunnery. She made her life procession at the age of 15. Interestingly, when she had been given as an oblate, another girl had been given the same. Sorry, it was a little before that. But they made their life professions together. Jutta, this is the other woman who's written about. Jutta was the daughter of Hildegard's father's immediate superior in the chain of authority of nobility. Now, Jutta becomes important because she and Volmar, who was a Benedictine monk from the monastery that was associated there, in fact, he was the prior, which is second in command of that monastery. And he was the confessor to the nuns and teacher. So Jutta and Volmar, who will become extremely important, were the people who taught her to read and write. She was also taught to sing the Latin psalms and canticles in order to be able to chant the services, which was an important part of the life of the monasteries and the nunneries. Jutta became prioress.
How do you spell that name, John?
Jutta. Jutta became prioress in 1136. Jutta became prioress until her death in 1136. Now, at this time, I don't do math very well. At this time, Hildegard would be probably 39, 40 years old. And she was elected as magistrat. Now, monasteries did not all follow the same internal governmental system. In some of them, their heads of the monastery would be appointed by the local bishop or some other, or the head of their order. But in probably most of them, they were elected. So if you're an abbot, you probably got elected by the other monks. If you were a mother superior, you would probably have been elected by your nuns, and that's what happened here. Now, a magistrat, which is just the female master, a magistrat is not as high-ranking as a prioress. A magistrat is under the authority of a local monastery. She runs her own show, but she's answerable to the abbot of the male monastery. Abbot Kuno, who was the abbot of the monastery at that time, asked Hildegard to be a prioress, which would put her under his authority. And she said no. She wanted more independence for herself and for her nuns. And so she asked Abbot Kuno to allow them to move about 15 miles away to a place called Rupertsberg to start a new monastery. They were Benedictines. Benedictines refer to their nunneries as monasteries. This would have given her more independence, and her intention, her stated intention, was that it would be a move towards a stricter rule of life. She thought things were too lax. The abbot declined. Hildegard began a long period of attempting to get approval for her plan from Kuno's own superiors. In other words, she went over his head. And eventually, she did receive the approval of the Archbishop of Mainz, who was the abbot's superior. But Abbot Kuno didn't say yes until something happened. And what happened is Hildegard was stricken by an illness that paralyzed her. She's described as being paralyzed and unable to move from her bed. An event that she openly attributed to God's unhappiness at her for not following his orders to move her nuns to Rupertsberg. Hildegard and 18 nuns, once permission was received, moved out to Rupertsberg in 1150. Volmar, who had been her confessor and who'd been the second in command of the monastery, was sent with them to be provost, which is sort of chief of staff, and confessor to Hildegard and her nuns, and also to serve her as what is variously described as a scribe or a secretary. A young woman named Ricardus von Stade, about whom I will have a great deal to say later, joined the monastery about this time, and she also served Hildegard as a personal secretary and scribe. There were others who did so as well through the years. Hildegard's going to live a long time. But Volmar, and for a shorter time and to a lesser extent, Ricardus were the two really important people, and you will see later just how important they were. Hildegard required that the Rupertsberg convent admit only sisters of noble birth. Her rationale for this, in her own words, this is her policy as written, classes of people should not be mixed, or they will fall out through deceit or arrogance and the shame occasioned by their differences. The greatest danger of all is a breakdown in peaceful manners through mutual backbiting and hatred, when the upper class pounce on the lower, or when the lower is promoted above the higher. Apparently, class distinctions mattered inside those walls. Now, this monastery thrived, and in 1165, Hildegard was to found the second monastery for nuns at a place called Bingen, not terribly far away. It was during these years that she began to establish a reputation as a mystic and a seer, someone who could see in visions things that could not be known by normal beings, including the future. Now, it is very notable, at least in my mind, that the name that she became known by was not the name of prophet, but rather the Sibyl of the Rhine. And I need to talk a good bit about Sibyls because I like talking about them. Sibyls, or the Sibyl, a figure deeply rooted way back in Mediterranean mythology, starting in the ancient Near East. The Sibyls represented a bridge between the mortal world and the divine, or the spiritual world. Often described as prophetesses or oracles. They were more than that, but they were that. They believed they were believed to have the ability to foretell the future, or to have the future revealed to them by some god or other. I'm talking now about the pagan sibyls. They were all pagan. And to convey to anyone who consulted them words of wisdom that were given them by the gods. Their role was not merely to predict events. You know, what horse is going to win the race next week, but also to guide humanity by revealing deeply hidden truths about the very fabric of the cosmos. So, on the one hand, they were a practical asset. It would help to know what's going to happen next week. On the other hand, they were seen as the carriers of deeper wisdom, particularly wisdom about things that could not be discerned by the senses. They were mortal women, but they spoke for the gods. Probably the most famous of the sibyls today, the one that people remember, and if they say the sibyl, it's the one they always mean, is the sibyl at Delphi, who was the priestess of Apollo. And the shrine at Delphi, which endured for centuries, attracted people who wanted to consult the sibyl from all over the Mediterranean, from well outside the areas of Greek influence. But where the role of the sibyl really became culturally central, almost central, certainly highly significant, was in ancient Rome. The sibyls were consulted by individual people with their individual concerns, and were consulted by leaders, political leaders, military leaders. Their prophecies were taken extremely seriously. This was very, very serious stuff. They were often rather cryptic in nature. That is, they could be subject to a couple of different interpretations. A classic example of this is during the Persian invasion of Greece, when the citizens of Athens consulted with the sibyl at Delphi. What should we do? And the sibyl said, leave. You've got no chance. Get out. Well, that's not what they wanted to hear. So they sent another delegation. And the sibyl said, put your faith in the wooden walls. And some of them said, the Acropolis, the ancient fortress and now a worship center of Athens, at this time had been made into a worship center. The Acropolis has a wooden wall. So if we go up there, Athena will protect us. Thank you, Sybil. But a lot of other people said, no, that's not it. The wooden walls means our ships. It means we're to get on the boats and get the heck out, and then fight them from somewhere else, which they did. Won the Battle of Salamis and eventually threw the Persians out. That's typical of how the sibyls work, and it shows how very seriously their prophecies were taken. Now, there were two sibyls that were extremely important in ancient Rome. One was the Cumaean sibyl, who was located in a cave at Cumae near Naples. Cumae was the first Greek colony in Sicily, in what came to be known as Greater Greece. And she's probably best known for her role in Virgil's Aeneid. She's the one who guides the hero Aeneas on his journey to the underworld. And the other is the Erymanthian sibyl from what is now Turkey. You see those? That's the Cumaean sibyl, and that's the Erymanthian. Or maybe the other way around, I'm not sure. In any event, here's how important they were. When Michelangelo received the commission to paint the Sistine Chapel, the original commission called for the ceiling of the chapel painted with the 12 apostles. Michelangelo, you may not know this, Michelangelo insisted that no one enter that place while he was at work at all. He didn't paint what he'd been commissioned to paint. What he did paint, of course, is the famous scene of the creation. You all know it. Of the creation of Adam. You all know that one. But he included, let me see if I got it right. He included, shoot, I can't remember the numbers now, I'm sorry. I think yes, he included, instead of the 12 apostles, 7 Old Testament prophets and 5 sibyls. That's how important they continue to be. Yeah. The sibyls became very important in Western Christianity, even though they're pagan. They became important because many of their prophecies, which have been written down and preserved, were seen as pointing to Christ. Now, I'm sorry, Anne and Claude on here, because I know Anne is reading City of God now, St. Augustine's great book. And in chapter 23 of book 18, the title of that chapter is Concerning the Erythraean Sibyl, who is known to have sung many things about Christ more plainly than the other sibyls. In other words, the prophecies of the sibyls were sort of drafted into the church's teaching as prophecies. The influence of these pagan sibyls was significant in Christian art for centuries. And that's reflected in many works of sacred art, paintings, frescoes, altarpieces, illuminated manuscripts, sculpture, and music. Can you put up?
He's there.
Rick, can you put up that Van Eyck altarpiece? This is another important thing. I like art things. Yeah, this is what the famous Ghent altarpiece from 1423 looks like when it's closed. Now, these altarpieces were a very important feature of churches in the Netherlands and Germany particularly, but also throughout other parts of Europe. They were triptychs, one big center panel and 2 side panels, and the side panels could be folded in to make it just one thing. They were generally kept folded in, except for certain feast days when they'd be opened up. So where we have the cross, that would be the tribute. And this is what the Ghent altarpiece, which is one of Van Eyck's masterpieces, looks like when it is when it's closed. The upper scene is the Annunciation, the angel Gabriel, the Virgin Mary, and the 2 sibyls that I've mentioned at the top. People always say, who's an angel? They're not angels, they're sibyls. Also important in Christian music for a very long time. Now, in the 13th century, we think, some people think it's much older, but we're certain that it was written down in its current form in the 13th century. There's a very famous hymn called the Dies Irae, Day of Wrath. And that hymn was required to be sung at funerals for hundreds of years. It still exists. The first verse will give you a taste of it. That day of wrath, that dreadful day, shall heaven and earth in ashes lay, as David and the sibyl say. And if you want the rest of it, you can easily read it. It's hymn 468 in our hymn. Okay, so the symbols are still a thing. Now, why is this important? Firstly, it will give you some insight into this background, that this idea of wise women with a particular link to the gods, it was fertile ground for someone like Hildegard to get the influence that she did. And if you hold the image of the Sibyl and the role of the Sibyl in your mind, you'll see how much she sort of seems to resonate with that. There is one major difference. With one exception, Hildegard never claimed and never seemed to go into a trance of any sort when she delivered her prophecy. She wrote about how she did, and I thought about reading you the description of it, but it was so mystical I couldn't understand. But she claimed that she saw with her own eyes and heard with her own ears, and what was happening. This was not the case with many of the Sibyls, particularly the Delphic Sibyl, who went into a trance, spoke in sort of a babble, which the priest of Apollo would then render into the final form, usually in verse form. And she didn't do that, okay? She did not. One thing I want you to take away from this discussion about the Sibyls, and I think this is important. There's always been a tension in the church, at least from very, very early, like first, second century, between people who take the same sort of approach to Scripture that the Muslims take to the Quran. In a very famous incident in ancient 6th or 7th century, 7th or 8th century, sorry, when the Muslims captured Cairo, famously they burned all the books in Cairo. Why? Because the commander who had taken the city said, if what's in those books doesn't agree with the Quran, it must be destroyed, and if it does agree with the Quran, it's unnecessary, because we have the Quran. And there have been throughout the history of the church movements who pretty much said, everything you need to know is in the Bible, forget everything else. And a real hostility towards the ancient world. There's a different approach. It was probably best expressed by Dr. Sparrow, who was a leading theologian in the 19th century, and in his dictum, which for many years, and I don't think it still is, but for many years, including up to when I was there, was the unofficial motto of Virginia Seminary: seek the truth, come whence it will, cost what it may. And the idea was that God's grace extends beyond the church. Salvific grace, no. But the grace to see and know truth, yes. Consequently, we should not despise any seeker for truth, and we should be able to recognize it when we see it. It's all the truth. The truth is the actual reality of what God created. And consequently, it is something which we should be grateful to be able to learn about from whatever source.
Father, would you repeat that little slogan, seek the truth, again?
Seek the truth, come whence it may, cost what it will. And I can't forget that, because I saw it almost every day for a number of years, because it was written over the arch on the western wall of the old chapel, the one that burned down. Anyhow, on to Hildegard. Once she was established as magistrate, before even they moved to the new monastery at Rupertsburg, Hildegard began to go public with the fact that she was having these mystical experiences. Before that, she had kept it pretty close. It was not general knowledge, let's put it that way. Began to have them written down. She claimed that they had begun when she was 3 years old. I'll leave it to you to evaluate how well a woman in her 40s would remember what had happened in her 3s, but there. In early 1148, the Pope sent a commission to her monastery to investigate Hildegard and her visions. Now, this was not a hostile commission. It was not, it was not sort of the Inquisition in Ovo, but it was a commission of inquiry. What's going on up there in Germany with this woman Hildegard? The commission reported back that the visions were authentic, and they took back with them to Rome some written accounts of the visions. Some of these were being written down as part of a book I'll talk about later called StA&StM, which when it came out. Portions of this book were read aloud at the Synod of Trier in 1148, and the Pope sent Hildegard a letter with his blessing. Now, this letter becomes important because it was later construed to be what it was not explicitly, and that is papal approval for anything Hildegard might see or say. The book that she was writing at that point is known as the StA&StM. That's compressed into one word. That's shorthand for Scivia Domini, seek the way of the Lord. It begins, it was published in 1151 or 1152, well, not published, but it was kind of began to make its way out into the world. In 1151 or 1152, it begins with a claim of direct divine command to write it. According to Hildegard, this is what God said to her. O you who are wretched earth, and as a woman untaught in all learning of earthly teachers, and unable to read literature with philosophical understanding, you are nonetheless touched by my light, which kindles in you an inner fire like a burning sun. Cry out and relate and write these my mysteries that you see and hear in mystical visions. The Scrivia describes 26 religious visions that she experienced. It's the first of 3 books that she wrote describing her visions. The others being, and the very name will tell you a lot about them, the Book of the Rewards of Life, and concerning the operations of God, or the work of God. Late in life, an edition of the Scrivia was put together at Rupertsberg at the express command of Hildegard. It was known as the Rupertsberg Codex. And one of the things that makes the Rupertsberg Codex interesting is it's not the text, it's the illustrations. It has 35 miniatures, and you'll see one of them later. The Rupertsberg Codex, unfortunately, was destroyed in 1945, or lost, but presumed destroyed, because this is getting towards the end of the Second World War, and it was sent away from the monastery for safekeeping. It was sent to Dresden. Yeah. However, In 1923, in I believe Oxford, but certainly in Britain, there had been made a precise copy of the manuscript as well as the illustrations. So we know what they looked like. I mean, they were reproduced many times, obviously, but this was intended to be essentially a facsimile. So that does still exist. The Scriptures is divided into three parts. The first part is the one that includes that preface describing how God said right, and it includes 6 visions. They all deal with themes of creation and the fall. One of the interesting things about her, to me, is that she shows a great interest in 2 books of the Bible, but not so much interest in any of the others. One of those books is Genesis, and the other is the Gospel of St. John.
Not bad choice.
Those are, no, not bad at all. Those are the 2 that she references the most. The second part deals with 7 visions, and that deals with themes of salvation through Christ, the nature of the church, and the sacraments. And the third part, with 13 visions, is about the coming kingdom of God through sanctification and about intensifying war between the forces of good and the forces of evil. The final vision, includes 14 songs to which she wrote both the music and the words, and a portion of a musical drama, which was later published as the Ordo Virtutum, the rule, I guess, of virtue. In each vision, she first describes what she saw and heard, and then says what she heard, and she always referred to those words as being from the voice of heaven. The second book, completed in 1163, has to do with morality. It's in many respects a prose expression of that play that she wrote, that musical play. I should talk about that. Everybody's heard about morality plays, medieval morality plays. Sometimes this is described, the Ordo Virtutum is described as a morality play. It really wasn't. Morality plays were done for the general public. The Ordo Virtutum was written to be used in the convent as part of liturgical worship. Now, this will seem odd to you, but the rebirth of theater in the West came about through the churches. The original Christians were hostile to theater, okay? Because there was so much mythology in it, so much was pagan. And there were other reasons as well, particularly because remember, they're functioning within the Roman Empire. And Roman theater was really it could be very nasty in a lot of ways. There was, a lot of them were flat out pornographic, and some of them were very, very, very violent, and the really brutal, in-your-face stuff. And that induced a real hostility to theater, so it never really recovered from that until the later Middle Ages, when the monks and nuns began writing a little short plays, often very short. The earliest is known as the Quim Quiris, which means whom do you seek? And it was to be done on Easter morning. as part of the celebration of Mass. And it's very simple. There are only three characters. The two women who go to the tomb and the angel who asks them, "Quem queris?" Whom do you seek? And from that began the tradition of reintroducing theater as a part of Christian civilization. But this is a very early example of that, but it's not a full-fledged morality play. That's a different thing. It develops out of that, and it's not done as part of a worship service. In the order of virtutum, a personification of each vice attempts to seduce one of the three souls that are represented with artful speeches, which are refuted by speeches by personifications of various Christian virtues. All parts would be taken by the nuns except one. We'll get to that later. It was never performed outside of the monastery in her lifetime. Now, whether it's been performed since, I have no idea. But it was, so it's not really a morality play. It's something she produced as part of the liturgy to be used inside the monastery. The same book is notable as being one of the very earliest descriptions of purgatory as a place where each saved soul would have to be further purified and perfected before entering fully into God's presence in heaven. What's notable about it is that Hildegard presents this process as one of punishments, some of which are described with apparent relish and in considerable grisly detail. I've seen them described as grotesque. Her third work was known as the Book of Divine Works. It is the most mystical of all. Sometime about 1163, she received what she described as an extraordinary mystical vision in which was revealed sprinkling drops of sweet rain, which she claimed, and this is a pretty bold claim, was the same experience of the Apostle John when he wrote the Gospel. She presented her vision as a representation of the entirety of the work of God. When I read that, my mind immediately flashed to the unified field theory. Y'all familiar with it? Unified field theory. Albert Einstein and many others believe that there is a unified field theory which will explain the interaction of all types of energy in one grand equation. Haven't found it yet. And yeah. It includes 10 visions. Most of them are illustrated by grand female figures personifying either divine love or divine wisdom. The writing is lyrical, poetic, mystical, much more so than the others. It also includes her commentary on the Gospel of John, on the prologue to the Gospel of John, and a further commentary on the 7 days of the creation of the world, as told in Genesis 1 and 2. And finally, the 5 visions of the third part look back to the course of salvation history and forward to the prophecy of the return of the coming and the ultimate fall of the Antichrist. She is significantly important in a number of fields. Firstly, music. We have from her one of the largest bodies of work of any medieval composer. Now, admittedly, a lot of medieval compositions are anonymous, but there are a lot. The Ortus Virtutum, that play, has 89 different songs. We also have 69 others from her. They were monophonic. There's no harmony. There's just one lyric line, and it's chanted, sung, and they were composed to be sung by her nuns. She wrote both the words and the music for all of these. They're notable. They're very artistic, actually. They're notable for the way the words and the music complement one another. A good example of this, the last words, the last verse of the Ordo Virtutum, the play, is Genova vestra ad patrum vestrum flectite, ut vobis manum suum forigat, which is an injunction to the nuns. Bend your knees to your father that he may stretch out his hand to you. Now there's a musical term called a melisma. A melisma is where you take one syllable and draw it out, moving from note to note. That's a melisma. Right? There are a lot of them in hymns, right? And there's a lot of them in chant. She may have set the record. The last word I said was porgat. That means stretch out. Okay? It's a melisma of 39 notes. Those nuns must have had great breath control. And you can sort of see this, you know, this long drawn out, stretched out note is the word stretch out. She was good. I mean, this is fine music. It was revived really in the 21st century. We'll go get later to how she came back to notice in the 21st century. Another field in which she is considered a pioneer is what might be called scientific, sort of, medicine. While serving in her first monastery, before she became chief of a monastery, she was what is known as the infirmaria. That's the person in charge of the infirmary. Now, the Benedictines had a special ministry of these infirmaries, which were always located inside the grounds of the monastery. And they were places of healing. Remember, there were very few places of healing other than these, frankly. And she was in charge of the monastery's infirmary and the monastery's garden. Now, the gardens were for growing both food things and medical things, right? So that was the infirmary's job. She continued her interest in healing. I don't think she cooked much. She continued her interest in healing throughout her life. And she wrote 2 books regarding medicine. The first one is generally known as the Physica, which just means medicine. It's 9 books. A book and 9, a book is, it's one book, but all under one title. And it describes in really good detail. She was a good observer when she gets down to how to care for the plants and so forth. It describes the medicinal properties of various plants, animals, and stones.
Wow.
This is an extraordinarily important book. It's the first recorded reference to the use of hops in beer. I mean,
Very important.
And she knew why. Do you know why? You know why hops are in beer? It's not for the taste. The way you make beer is you take grain and pour boiling water over it. and then allow it to ferment. Well, fermentation is what happens when yeast eats up the sugars that have been the sugars that are present in the boiled liquid. What's left after you boil the mash. That's what it's called. You all know that.
Yep.
Well, here's what you don't know. There's a lot of wild yeast in the air, and you can only put yeast into the mash when the temperature has lowered, because yeast can't survive above a certain temperature. Well, if you put the yeast in too soon, it dies. But there are other things other than yeast that likes to eat that sugar, other micro type things. And they can get in and get established, and then there's not as much sugar, so you don't get as much alcohol. And sometimes you lose the whole batch. This happened to us twice at Mount Vernon making whiskey, because we used hops the same way the beer makers did when I was working in the distillery there. But if you put the hops in the water that you're boiling, that kills off the other microbes, so you don't lose it. And she knew this. Well, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people know it. It's Germany, after all. But the point is, anyway, enough of that. Her second book is called Causa et Cura, Causes and Cures. It's description and explanation of how the human body works, how it's connected to the rest of the natural world, and as the as the title would imply, the causes and cures of various diseases. Now, much of her advice is what I would call common sense. You know, things like moderation in diet, what foods to eat, what foods to avoid, get enough rest, don't allow yourself to get overstressed, and lead a wholesome moral life. The same kind of stuff that you'd get from the ancient writers on medicine. But, and this becomes important in her theological work, she was a great believer in the theory of the four humors. Now, the theory of the four humors is started at least well before the 4th century BC. And basically, Hippocrates is really put it together and organized it completely, but it was floating around long before that. The theory of the four humors is this. Human beings contain four what were known as humors. It has nothing to do with funniness. It comes from the Greek word for taste. Black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. And to be in a state of good health, all four of those humors have to be balanced in proportion to one another. The proper blending and balancing the four humors is known as eucrasia, well-being. Now, you may think this is, just ancient stuff, and it is, but it had an effect on our language. Phlegm was classified as one of the two cold and slow humors, and that's where the word phlegmatic comes from. And blood was classified as one of the hot and optimistic humors, and that is where the word sanguine comes from. Okay, so we're still using language that dates back to the theory of the four humors. Incidentally, one of the things I do remember from my undergraduate years, I took a course at Chaucer. And Chaucer, of course, believed in the theory of the four humors too. Everybody did, up until about the 17th century. Everybody in Europe believed in the theory of the four humors. It was settled science. Wait a minute, where was I going? Yeah, okay, well, she believed very strongly in the theory of four humors. She also believed that Genesis there's Genesis again, had taught her that all created things were intended by God for human use, for food, for raw materials, for making tools and shelter and clothing, and for medicine. Hildegard, oops, I just repeated myself, I'm sorry.
Well, Frank, where are you on pictures?
Pardon me?
Where are you on pictures?
I don't know. I don't need any right now.
Pardon?
We're only on the second one.
Let's-
Three more that you want.
That's all right. We'll get there.
Okay.
I got miles to go.
Oh, okay.
This
Could you tell us what exactly the four humors?
black bile, yellow bile, blood, and phlegm. In her disquisition on what was, I got to finish with the medicine first. Her argument, part of her argument here. Whoa. I got to see. My hands are betraying me tonight. I apologize. I get this way sometimes. It's gotten better lately, but sometimes it comes back on me. Yeah, okay. Since blood is one of the four humors, sorry, I'm not finished. This in the second book, Causes and Cures, in addition to prescribing cures for various ailments, she tells how to treat common injuries, burns and fractures and stuff like that. And the books are historically significant because they reveal in detail various aspects of medieval medicine that are otherwise very poorly documented. And she did a better job than most, although certainly not perfect. In addition, since blood is one of the four humors, she was a great advocate of the grand old practice of medicinal bleeding, the deliberate opening of a vein to remove excess blood from the body. See, that would bring it, if your imbalance was you had too much blood, well, we can take care of that, slit. And that was practiced well into the 19th century. Okay? So don't think, well, anyway. Her second medical book, Causes and Cures, includes detailed and highly specific instructions about bleeding of both people and animals. These included things to be considered when bleeding were the sex of the patient, the location on the body from which the blood should be taken, different places on the body for different diseases, the phases of the moon, and how much blood should be taken. Now, she didn't give specific measurements, but the same sort of approximations that we find in medieval cookbooks. Things like, as much as will fill the shell of a duck. Okay, so her belief in the importance of the phases of the moon was not limited to bleeding. She also taught that both conception and the treatment of conditions arising from pregnancy were strongly affected by the waxing and waning phases of the moon. Now, underlying all this was her take on the theory of four humors. She believed that all disease was a result of the fall. That when Adam and Eve came about, they were in perfect balance and therefore in perfect health. Their humors were in perfect health. But eating forbidden fruit increased the amount of phlegm in Adam. As a result of which, and I don't know how she thought this happened, I'm just telling you what she thought, some of his blood was changed to semen, which she describes as a poison, and that's how it would be transmitted to all subsequent generations of humanity. Pope Benedict XVI made this statement: unlike other medieval authors who saw Eve's weakness as the cause of the fall, Hildegard places it above all in Adam's immoderate passion for her. So that'll give you some idea of what kind of person she was, but why is she so important? Well, I want to talk about her influence during her lifetime. Ooh. There was something going on in Hildegard's lifetime that was deeply concerning to the Roman Catholic Church. There was a tremendous amount of corruption, frankly, in the church. And partly as a result of that, there were a number of heresies that sprang up, one of which was very successful. This was known as the Albigensian heresy, also known as the Cathars. They were a heresy that arose and flourished particularly in southern France and northern Spain. How successful were they? So successful that they weren't put down until the Pope called a crusade against them. I mean, this was not just itinerant preachers. This was people from the very top ranks of society, the ones who controlled the military power. And it was put down like with a war. It's as simple as that. It was a war. And the Cathar heresy was very, very successful for quite a while. I'm sure you have all heard the rather crude statement, kill them all, let God sort them out. That is a version of what was uttered by the leader of the crusade against the Cathars. When asked, some of these people in this town are heretics, but others aren't. You're just telling us kill them all. And he replied, kill them all, God will know his own. So that's how serious it was. Hildegard was asked, now this is a woman, bear in mind. Hildegard was asked to go on public preaching tours around Germany. She did so 4 times. 4 different times. The latest time she was in her 60s. And she preached to large crowds. She made lengthy preaching tours. And she spoke about her visions and her religious insights and about the evils of heretical doctrine. This was highly unusual for a woman to preach at all. But this is a woman preaching, claiming to be the direct voice of God. This was very controversial, wildly successful, but it also aroused a lot of opposition, in part just flat out because she was a woman. But also there began to be accusations of heresy. That what she considered herself Orthodox, but a lot of Orthodox theologians thought she was not. No formal charges were ever placed against her, but a lot of what she was teaching was sort of suspect. St. Francis underwent the same thing. Francis was also considered heretical by many of his contemporaries. She was famous for a number of reasons, obviously, but one of them that I've not even touched on yet was her political role, diplomacy, She maintained an extensive correspondence with nearly 400 letters surviving, as I said. Letters written to powerful lay rulers, church leaders across Europe. She acted as an advisor sometimes at their request, sometimes on her own initiative, claiming always to be doing so at God's insistence. Her most common themes were to urge an end to violent conflicts and injustices, condemnation of moral corruption and abuses of office, especially simony, the selling of office by church leaders. She heartily supported the persecution of various heretical movements, especially the Cathars. But interestingly enough, she viewed heretics as false prophets and said they should be persecuted, but also said that the persecution should not extend to execution, because heretics, even though they were heretics, still bore the image and likeness of God. And there's Genesis again. She involved herself in church politics, supporting or opposing various candidates for high office. And as you might expect, all this brought her into a number of conflicts with ecclesiastical authorities. Although considering herself theologically orthodox, she was, as I said, sometimes accused of heresy, though never formally charged. Her willingness to defy the instructions of her own ecclesiastical superiors by claiming direct divine command to do so actually eventually led to her being briefly excommunicated.
Wow.
And her monastery placed under a papal interdict. Interdict is the Pope saying that within a certain area, no sacraments, none, and no Christian burial. So, no baptisms, it wouldn't bother a monastery too much. No baptisms, no celebration of the Eucharist, no confession, and no Christian burial. Wow, that's heavy. So she knew how to get herself into trouble. Okay, she died in 1179. She was immediately hailed as a saint. She probably had been during her own lifetime. But she became just, in the mind of most of the world, I think, or most Christians, she was yet another somewhat obscure, not really obscure, but not as important as she now is held to be. So her later influence was important figure in the history of music, important figure in the history of medicine. Her music had been used in a few places, but not many. But she got rediscovered, really beginning in the early 20th century, but she really came into her real importance in the 1960s. For a number of reasons, some good, some bad. I'll let you decide which. That's when her role in the history of music and history of medicine became of interest to secular historians. That's when her music began to be used again in liturgies. And if you go online, go to YouTube, you'll find lots and lots of videos of her music being sung. Three other things that were beginning to happen in the 60s resulted in her being brought forward into the public consciousness in a way she hadn't been for a long time. The first, and probably the most important, was the feminist movement in academia and theology. She was a powerful and important woman, flourishing despite the fact that she lived in a period of frequently misogynistic male hierarchy. So she became a big figure in the feminist movement. And she really was powerful and important, probably as powerful and important as any woman, any nun would be until Catherine of Siena. she really mattered. People listened to her, and the people who listened to her did have power. The second reason that she sort of came back into prominence in the 60s, and I'm going to tell you exactly what I wrote down in my notes. New Age crap. Remember when I talked about her idea about plants, animals, and stones?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. She believed that certain stones, particularly some crystals, are precious stones. I'm not talking about a rock you're going to pick up in the river. I mean,
No pet rocks.
you got a sore throat? Well, you need a ruby. Anyhow, and with this whole sort of crystal thing, woo, she's just made for that. All right? You will find that this is a phenomenon. People who have absolutely no interest in Christianity per se, will seize upon some saint as a forerunner of whatever they are pushing. Who's America's most, I don't mean born in America, I mean who's probably the most famous, best known saint in America,
Saint
except for
Francis.
Patrick on one day a year?
Francis.
St. Francis.
Yeah.
Why?
He's the animals.
Ecology, yes. And animal liberation, all that stuff. He's not even the patron saint of gardens, so there. It's St. Fiacre. It got picked up to some degree by the Quakers. She got picked up by some degree to the Quakers because the Quaker doctrine, what they call the inner light, which is the idea that every human being, regardless of anything, an inner light by which they can discern truth. All right, and she used the language of light a lot in describing her. Finally, the third movement that picked her up, and this I've got to tell you about in some detail, is the gay movement. Here's why. Now, given her continent-wide reputation in her own life, and the fact that her earliest biographers referred to her as a saint and attribute to her miracles of healing both during and after her life, one source, but only one source I could find, also claimed she cast out demons. And given that we're talking about this period of time fairly early on, you would have thought she'd have been canonized and added to the official calendar of saints fairly soon after her death. But she wasn't. Why not? Well, here's a little timeline for you. She died, I'm terrible with numbers, you all know that.
1179.
Yeah, she died in 1179. In 1220, and she was immediately hailed as a saint locally. Remember, some of the bishops still named saints at this period. The abbot and convent of Rupertsburg, her convent, petitioned for her canonization by Rome. And immediately, in January of the next year, the then Pope, Gregory IX, initiates the canonization process. Now, the process wasn't as developed as it is now. It wasn't quite as formalized, it wasn't quite as elaborate as it would later become. But it was now a process. You needed the Pope if you wanted to get your name in the calendar. So, the Pope immediately says, oh, yeah, sure, let's do that. Okay, so he puts together a commission and sends them up to Germany to, talk to people who know and do whatever, look at all the documents and stuff, and make a report, what would be called a canonization protocol. It's a report of the commission, plus supporting documentation, documents that they've copied. That had been sealed in 1233, and it was sent to the then Pope along with a copy of the Life of Hildegard, copies of some of her other writings, and an assessment of her work which had been issued by the theological faculty of the University of Paris, which was summarized as Hildegard's writings do not contain human but divine words. 4 years later, the canonization protocol was rejected on the grounds that it did not meet formal requirements. Exact details concerning the specified miracles, such as dates and places and names of witnesses. No, you didn't dot the I's and cross the T's. Do it over. So, the Pope, Gregory IX, puts together a new commission. Now, why did it take 4 years to see that that the form was not correct? That's a little questionable. In 1237, Gregory IX puts together a new commission, and it's got some pretty high-hitting, pretty heavy-hitting people. The three most senior members of which are all from the cathedral chapter of Mainz Cathedral. The Archbishop of Mainz was the overseer of that monastery. They were under his authority from her time on. There is no further record of this commission ever reporting back to Rome or even convening. Why? In 1243, there's a new pope, Innocent IV. Interesting guy. Famous as a canon lawyer. So this is the right guy to have on the job, right? He really was a famous canon lawyer, wrote a lot of canon law. First year he's a pope, 1243. Puts another commission together. The original protocol is revived, it's amended in several ways, a lot of things are added. We know that happened, and that's all we know. There is no further mention of the proceeding. It's like a bill dying in committee. It wasn't rejected, it just was ignored. Interestingly enough, later, much later, 1326, the monastery of Rupertberg is granted several indulgences, special privileges, by Pope John XXII. And he makes mention of, quote, the feast day of St. Hildegard. St. Hildegard. He calls her a saint. This is the first papal document which officially refers to Hildegard as a saint, but she's still not in the calendar. 1489. The Archbishop of Mainz then tries to set the canonization process in motion again in the hope of finding new documents. Now, I don't understand that, but that's what I read. In the hope of finding new documents, he orders Hildegard's grave to be opened, but they don't find anything. I don't know why. It doesn't make any sense to me either. I think it was an excuse because they didn't put her back in the same grave. They moved her to a new and more elaborate shrine. Something happened outside of this process in 1493. There was a book printed in Nuremberg that year by a Nuremberg humanist named Hartmut Schiedel. And it really was an extremely important book. I remember reading about this in my medieval history course as an undergraduate. It was called The World Chronicle. It was a very, very important early printed book. It was a history book, okay, with detailed descriptions of places and people. And what makes it important is, firstly, it shows you the state of knowledge and opinion at that time. But secondly, it had lots and lots and lots and lots of woodcut illustrations. And it was sort of this idea that books intended for a general readership, meaning people rich enough to be able to afford them, should be illustrated, not just sacred manuscripts. So, he mentions Hildegard at length And that meant that her stuff started being read again. She's coming back, briefly. 1498, they reopened the grave again. No, they didn't find anything we're talking about. Okay, that's where it stood. Something appears to have happened to derail the canonization process. And there are 3 possibilities. The first one is the question, and there are questions, as to the genuineness of the writings. How big a role did her secretaries, Volmar and Ricardus, both of whom were highly educated, play in the actual writings? Just how heavily did they edit them? To what degree, if any, should they be considered their work rather than hers? Remember the Sibyls? Some of them are known by what's written, but they didn't write it. It was the priest who intervened with them who wrote it. So that's one possibility. Second possibility, questions of doctrinal soundness. There is a lot in her writing that, when you take it as far as you should take it, isn't really orthodox. And finally, there is, and I said, I started this by saying she became an icon for the gay community, is the matter of Ricardus d'Estaing. Now, even among the aristocratic nuns among whom she lived, Ricardus stood out from, or better, stood above the rest.
Sorry, who is that? I don't remember.
Ricardus d'Estaing. Sorry, von Stade. Right, she's the one, the young nun who was appointed to be a secretary to.
Oh, okay.
Okay. She's reputed to have been beautiful, a talented musician, fluent in a number of languages, especially Latin, and well educated in both scriptures and the classics. Her family is said to have been unusually devout, and they were certainly rich, powerful, and of unimpeachable noble ancestry. Her father was a Markgraf, which is just below a duke, of Stade. One of her brothers was to become the Archbishop of Bremen, and one of her sisters, you ready for this? Queen of Sweden. I mean, that's pretty much top drawer. When Abbot Kuno had refused Hildegard's request to move her aristocratic nuns to a new house at Rupertsberg, Ricardus's family has used their ecclesiastical and political influence to bring pressure on him to agree. And when he finally did so, they were instrumental in generously financially supporting the establishment of the new community. You're going to have, you got to build the buildings. By the way, the ruins of the abbey still exist, or of the church of the abbey. It's quite large. It lasted until the 30 Years' War, when it was deliberately destroyed by the Swedish army. Hildegard and Richards formed a very close and affectionate personal bond. So close that Ricardus's family appear to have eventually become concerned for both her soul and her reputation, and arranged for her to be elected abbess of Bassum Abbey, which is just a hair under 300 miles away from Rupertsberg. It was in the Diocese of Bremen. The bishop there was her brother. Hildegard's response to this was pretty extraordinary. She flatly refused to allow Ricardus to leave Rupertsberg. She said, "I will not release you from my authority as the head of this monastery." And she wrote a letter to Bishop Hartwig informing him that she had no intention of complying with his summons and telling him to withdraw it. Like many of her letters, it is long, and it employs some rather heated language. After informing the bishop that it was God's will that Ricardus remain in Rupertsberg, the letter closes with these words: May God grant you the blessings of the dew of heaven, and may all the choirs of angels bless you if you listen to me, God's servant, and if you fulfill God's will in this matter.
Wow.
Somehow Hartwig was not convinced. And he repeated, she's going to be the abbot of that place. Hildegard refused again. And she began a massive letter writing campaign. She wrote to members of Ricardus' family. She wrote to various ecclesiastical authorities, working her way up the chain, all the way to the Pope. Now, her letter to the Pope sadly did not survive, but his reply to her does survive. She received no support for her failure to release Ricardus from the Pope or anybody else of any real influence, and finally set Ricardus free to take up the position in Basum Abbey. A number of Hildegard's letters written to Ricardus after her move to Basum survive. This excerpt from one, I think, is pretty typical of their tone and their content. Daughter, listen to me, your mother, speaking to you in the Spirit. My grief flies up to heaven. My sorrow is destroying the great consolation and confidence that I once had in mankind. Woe is me, mother. Woe is me, daughter. Why have you forsaken me? I so love the nobility of your character, your wisdom, your chastity, your spirit, and indeed every aspect of your life, that so many people have said to me, what are you doing? Now let all who have grief like mine mourn with me, all who in the love of God have had such great love in their hearts and minds for a person as I had for you, but who was snatched away from them in an instant. Well, if she had made sure it wasn't an instant, as you were from me. But all the same, may the angel of God go before you, may the Son of God protect you, and may his mother watch over you. Now, whether or not, and I don't take any position on this, their relationship had been a physical one, Hildegard's repeated defiance of ecclesiastical authority based upon an insistence that her discernment of God's wishes was to be obeyed in preference to the wishes of her ecclesiastical superiors and the system of Basum Abbey, who had elected Ricardus. That's a little short of scandalous. It is scandalous. And it's all the more scandalous because some of the letters she wrote to those who opposed her in this matter, trying to convince them, can best be described as vicious personal attacks. When her bishop's immediate superior, the Archbishop of Mainz, wrote to her this: by the authority of our position as prelate and father, we give you this command to release this sister immediately to those who seek and desire her. Her response included this: your malicious curses and threatening words are not to be obeyed. You have raised up your rods of punishment arrogantly, not to serve God, but to gratify your own perverted will. That's to her archbishop. Whatever the reason, there were no further attempts to have her officially canonized by the papacy until the 21st century. And when it was done, by this time she was a really well-known figure. I mean, you've all heard of Hildegard of Bingen, I'm sure, in one context or another, as you were thumbing through your herbalist manuals or deciding which crystal to put under your pillow. When it was done by a canonically legal but highly unusual process known as equipollent canonization. Equipollent means of equal power. This is a provision in canon law which empowers a pope to declare someone a saint and to add his or her name to the church's calendar, without any consultation or any formal process at all. Just the Pope's power. It's very rarely invoked.
So
You're
which pope did?
I'm getting there. Gee, give me a break. It's very rarely used, and almost always, well, usually, for individuals who have been regarded as saints by many Catholics for a very long time, and for whom it would be impossible to conduct the usual process, given that anyone with personal knowledge of the proposed saint would be long since dead. Hard to get witnesses to a miracle from 600 years ago. Benedict XVI, surprisingly enough, canonized her and described her and even named her as a doctor of the church. There are only 4 women who pertain to that. He described her as an important female figure of the Middle Ages, distinguished by her spiritual wisdom and holiness of life. Now I got a couple more pictures here I want you to look at. Could we see that picture of Hildegard and Volmar, please? That one from 1151? I should have shown this one to you earlier. I got caught up in what I was doing. Where's Hildegard and Volmar? No. Yeah. Is that it? Yeah. No, that, I'll talk about this one since it's up. Here you see one of the illustrations from the Scrivios, okay? The book that I talked about that was destroyed, but we had good copies of. And what you see here, thank you. What you see here is Hildegard. Notice the fire above her head. She's receiving a vision. What she has in her hand is a wax tablet.
Okay.
You remember, I think I talked about this before to y'all. No, not that. This was something that the Romans used, and it had survived well into the Middle Ages. It would be like a book, but it's just 2 pieces of wood, like that. But each one has an indentation. It's cut out, and it's filled with wax. And you use a stylus, you can write in it, and then you can rub it out and do it again. We have actually numbers of these have survived because they were used for school kids, using them for instruction. People use them for short notes, things like that. And Volmar is over here. He's writing in a book. That's Volmar, her confessor. And this is Ricardus. And I think it's interesting to note that, given the limitations of medieval art, she does look pretty good. All right? She's not writing in that one. But this is, again, remember, this book, the book from which this illustration was taken, the Scrivios, had been commissioned, and undoubtedly the paintings in it approved by Hildegard herself, which I think is significant. There is also, among what I sent over, a picture of simply Hildegard and Volmar. There's no Ricardus in it, and it's pretty much the same thing. I don't know if you can find that one, Rick, or not. If you can, picture of Hildegard and I think it's the one that says Hildegard and Ricardus. It should be Hildegard and Volmar. I'm sorry. That was my bad type, my mistake. But it's very similar. Now, in his statement of canonization, the Declaration of Canonization, Pope Benedict made the point that this was being done in part as a way to recognize the role of women in the church that had previously been much overlooked. So here we have, you see why I said I couldn't possibly have done anything else tonight. I got really into this one. I think what we can learn from Hildegard, it is not how to bleed your horse. what I think this is illustrative of to me. That firstly, people can do great works for God, even though they may have some pretty unpleasant personal characteristics. And it's obvious from her letters, she could be nasty, and she was certainly a pushy broad. But anyway, but
Yeah, many things to say about
also that which saints will be more present in the consciousness of both the church and the general population at any given time will be strongly affected, maybe even determined by the nature of the needs and interests of that particular time. And Benedict, as I said, Benedict, in his statement of canonization, made the point that he thought it was necessary that the role of women in the church be better recognized, and that Hildegard was an excellent example of women's influence, some women's influence in the life of the church. I mean, think about it. For every person who can name even one of the archbishops in her lifetime, or even one of the popes, there've got to be 10,000 who can name Hildegard of Bingen. Now, and she is recognized as important in the secular world, as I said, as an important figure in the development of music. Her chant work is much more lyrical than most others, and among other things, previous to this, almost always the chants had a certain set length of syllables in each line. She dropped that altogether. All right, it was like 3 verse only. Her importance scientifically, as an example, in her writings about the growth of medicinal herbs, her very careful and detailed observation of how because after all, the time when you cut them matters, you don't want to do it until the leaf is so big and blah, blah, blah. Also the time, the phases of the moon when you cut them matter too. Her importance in the early history of medicine, because without her work, there's a great deal we would not know about how medieval medical practitioners operated. And her importance in the life of the church as a justification for genuine mystical experience. And some of her theological insights were unique. Some of them I think were questionable, but some of them are quite moving. All in all, there is no way that I can do her justice, even though I've run over in time, for which I apologize. I try not to do that. But she covered so much ground, and she had so much effect in so many ways, a lot of which has been forgotten because she was using her influence to affect the life of the church and to affect the life of larger society. She had no hesitation in writing to very important people like the emperor, telling him, "That's a nasty war you've got us into. Get out," that sort of thing. A lot of that has faded from interest to all but historians, I suspect. But much of what she has done continues to have an effect in the life of the church. So the next time you run across that hymn, remember who Hildegard was. And if you really want to dive into a rabbit hole that you won't get out of for months, just Google her and follow the way.
Father, how do you spell her girlfriend's name, Ricardas? How do you
Richard, like Richard, I-S. And yeah, I mean, when I got to the part about
her last name
Charges.
Vaughn, StA, S-T-A-E-E. StA is the name of the place. There is a town called StA and a district called StA. And that's where her family were the top dogs.
From StA.
Yeah, exactly.
Three Curtis from StA.
Precisely. It's a place, you know, but I swear, when I got that part about her sister being Queen of Sweden, I went, oh, wow, we're in deep water now. So, next time, I need y'all to make a decision, okay? And I had said that what I would like to do was talk about her and talk about Thomas a Becket in the same night. And obviously, I realized I couldn't. It was just too much ground I wanted to cover. So I'm going to give you an offer, and you decide. I'm happy either way. I can either do Thomas at our next meeting, or I can skip Thomas and go into the next century if you're getting bored.
No,
No.
Thomas.
You okay with it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, we got a long way to go. Okay, good. Thank you. Seriously, that was a serious offer, because I don't want to. Sometimes I bore me, so I don't want to.
Really?
But not with this one. Not with this one. I got really into it. Gwen will tell you, I think I've struggled more over this than any other one. Sir.
What did she consider heretical doctrine? What was,
Yeah,
what was
that's
it
Yeah, what, the
specifically?
Cathars and the Amnio, whatever they were.
The Cathars and the Albigensians?
Albigensians, yeah, what did they do?
Okay, they totally rejected the sacraments.
Oh.
They preached that it was all right, they were called the Albigensians because their biggest center of power was Albi. It's a town in southern France. They preached that it was possible to obtain earthly perfection. And anyone who did so was known as a Cathar, a perfect. All right? In Languedoc. These perfects, they also preach that if a perfect sinned, or if a person who had professed Catharism sinned, there was no possibility of forgiveness. They were vegetarians. They believed that eating meat imprisons others' souls, that everything living had a soul, that souls were not purely human, that eating meat that the soul was imprisoned in the body, and that when you died, your soul was released. You know, and if you were perfect, good for you, and if you weren't, bad for you. But not everybody could be a perfect in this life, but the perfects could help you in the next life. Anyhow, the soul was imprisoned in the body. Consequently, animals had souls. The animal soul's imprisoned. The soul wants to be free, but if you eat its meat, you're imprisoning its soul, so you can't eat any meat. The Cathars, they were mystics in various other ways as well. They preached that the church, the Catholic Church, Western Christendom, was totally corrupt, totally evil. It was corrupt in a lot of ways, totally evil, and to be resisted at all costs. Don't pay the tithes. All right? The Cathars, who were this unofficial leadership, somewhat unstructured leadership, the Cathars lived lives of extreme asceticism. All right? They, as I say, they were vegetarians. They abstained from all sorts of pleasures, including any sort of sexual pleasure. And they believed that everyone should. So their followers were supposed to be celibate, because after all, you're creating a new body. You're imprisoning another soul. All of this was heretical. And it was also very attractive. It was attractive firstly because the Cathars were people of the leadership. The perfects, they really were people of a very, very high moral standard. They didn't cheat. They didn't lie. They didn't take money from you. They didn't try to impose taxes or whatever. They lived extremely simply, really ascetically. They were sort of like itinerant monks almost. And also, as I said, if somebody comes along and tells me, you know, Randolph, you should really think about joining our bunch. We don't pay our taxes. I'd consider it. And the church was taking a lot of money from the people. So there was an economic motive as well as a spiritual motive, as well as in many places, I don't want to overstate this, but it was true in many places, a real disgust with what was happening in the church. It had become powerful, and when the church is powerful, it often becomes corrupt. One of the things that, as I think I mentioned, as Hildegard preached about the most, was simony. That is the selling of church offices. You know, you want to be a bishop? Yeah, I want to be a bishop. Bishop, rake it in, man. What's it worth to you? That sort of thing. All right. So that's the basis of the Calvary. Interestingly enough, Gwen and I were in Albee a few years ago. I highly recommend it. There's a wonderful museum there of, I think I mentioned this, the Toulouse-Lautrec Museum there, and he was from that area. And there's a cathedral that is one of the very, 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 very few French cathedrals not to have been completely gutted by the French revolutionaries. And they are the best cassoulet I've ever had. If you don't know cassoulet, go to France. It's really wonderful. It's a dish. We were in Albee, and I was very interested. There's a specific type of cross known as the Cathar cross, and that was adopted by the Cathars. Was adopted by the city of Albee and the area around as sort of a regional symbol. Now, there hasn't been a resurgence of Catharism, but they are still remembered. Partly, I think, in fact, because they were put down so brutally. It was a war. So, yeah.
So the Cathars didn't believe in repentance, or
they did not believe that it was possible to repent after committing sin. And after you had made your profession as a Cathar. Yes, I'm a member. Okay, you can't sin. If you're a perfect. Now, for the lesser people, there was forgiveness from the Cathars, from the perfects, okay? Think of the perfect as being like a priesthood or whatever. They could, I'm pretty sure I'm right about this. There are some things about the Cathars that we know only from their enemies. Well, you know, whatever they have was destroyed. And it doesn't always agree. But I think I'm right on this one. That they could forgive you your sins, but their sins could not be forgiven. So they better not. Once you accepted that, a lot of people would only accept full entry into Catharism on their deathbed. Just like in the early church, there were people who put off baptism for a very long, long time because there were all these arguments over post-baptismal sin. I'm not an expert on the Cathars. Believe me, that's what I remember. I am an expert on cassoulet, though. Folks, thank you. I do apologize for keeping you so late. I will try not to do that again.
Thank you very much.
I've done well so far, but I really got interested in her.
Okay.
Just in case.
And who do I have today? Oh, Mr. Polka Dot. Or Robinson.
I never heard that.
That's kind of what she's clearly very smart.
Let me tell you something else.
It depends. I mean, I've got
She clearly has a thing.